Yes, we're recording. You just can't hear it say that it's recording.
Okay.
Oh, here comes Wahaga.
Oh, very good. Hello. I'm going to call.
Yeah, you did that.
I'm calling the Assembly Human Resources Committee to order on November 13th, 2023 at 6:01 p.m. Ms. Atkinson, would you lead us in the land acknowledgement?
We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We're grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Guneshish.
Ms. Atkinson. Ms. Cathcart, would you note the roll, please?
Thank you, Chair Smith. You have your new committee, Mr. Bryson Wahagaduk, Ms. Atkinson, and you also have the mayor sitting in. A quorum is present, with you included.
Thank you, Ms. Cathcart. Any changes to the agenda? Sorry? Oh, and we are recording. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will note the agenda as approved as written. Any changes to the August 21st or September 11th meeting minutes from the Human Resources Committee? Seeing none, we will count those as approved as presented. So that gets us into our agenda topics. Three main issues today, just for kind of timing sense. I'm hoping to do about 25, maybe 30 minutes on Title IV rewrite, agenda topic 3, and then hopefully giving Mr. Palmer some time to go over the Whistleblower Act agenda item 4. And if we have time, we can do the midterm vacancy ordinance, but and then also a little time for empowered board interviews at the end. So get your calendars ready for that. But wanted to just queue up this issue of the Title IV rewrite. As some of you may know, there was a Title IV is the state of Alaska title of law that refers to alcohol regulation. And there was a big rewrite on it due to update a number of things. I believe Mr. Gonzalez from AMCO, the Alcohol Marijuana Control Office, might talk through some of those. A lot of changes, some of which sort of impact local governments and some of the powers and things they can do. Specifically, one of those is allowing governments to petition for additional restaurant or eating place licenses, REPLs. And I'm hoping that today we have a chance to kick around some questions the committee may have. It is something that come January 1st, local communities will have the power to do, to request those. But just want to get that idea kicking around. But I believe our first piece is going to be Mr. Gonzalez from AMCO giving a short presentation. So, Mr. Gonzalez.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Gabriel Gonzalez. I'm the local government specialist here at the Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office. And I did not prepare to go over all of the changes in AS04, but I was told to give you a briefing on the additional restaurant eating place license provision. So, and I will be brief. I know you have other business on your agenda. So if I may, I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see that all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, so there's a new provision in the Title IV rewrite, and it actually went into effect when the bill was signed into law last year. So municipalities, actually 2 municipalities have already requested and been approved for additional restaurant eating places in their communities, and that is the city of Valdez and the city of Wasilla. Wasilla was just approved 20 minutes ago in the ABC board meeting that just went into recess in Sitka. So again, it's AS 04-11-405 is the new provision. And it allows you to request restaurant eating place licenses in excess of your population cap. So the first thing to know on this before I get into the details is a restaurant and eating place license is only for beer and wine. It is not, you're not allowed to serve hard alcohol or distilled spirits under this license. So that's the first piece. The other thing is that the population limits on REPLs for the city and borough of Juneau, that you're capped because of your population at 22. And the ratio to determine that is they take your qualified population, they divide it by 1,500, so it's a 1 to 1,500 ratio. And that's how it's determined how many you're authorized to have. So I'll go into the next slide. Okay, so if you bear with me on this kind of busy little slide here, this is taken from our population and license cap spreadsheet that we keep on our website. And we use this to advise business owners when they call and say, hey, I want a bar license or I want a REPL. And we let them know if that particular municipality is at its cap or not. So if you start on the far left, so city and borough of Juneau, I'll get into what the red type and the small type means in a minute. But your net population was 32,000. If you look over here in the second column where it says 22, that is how many you're authorized at the 1 per 1,500 ratio. And if you look to the far right where you see 23, that is how many restaurant eating place licenses that are currently in the city and borough of Juneau. Now, one important note, that does not account for your bars that are also restaurants. Those operate under beverage dispensary licenses with restaurant designation permits. So that's not counting those. These are simply REPLs. You're capped at 22, you have 23. So if I go back to this note over here on the left in red, there was one license that was converted. Another change to Title IV that went into effect immediately was any REPL public convenience licenses that were out there automatically got converted to full REPLs. So that's why you are in excess of your cap. Now that there's nothing happens to those licensees. You're just at cap. If somebody calls and wants to apply for one, we let them know that they cannot. And please feel free to stop me if you have any questions on this as we go. This slide sometimes gets a lot of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We actually do have a question. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, I would imagine that you guys have a response for how you guys take tourism numbers into account. And while this chart makes sense for this time of the year, there's 32,000 people. What does the chart look like, or how do you accommodate for a summer day when there's 50,000 people in Juneau, and how's that taken into account?
Certainly. Thank you for your question. So that net population is, as you said, it's your residents, it's your qualified population there counted in the census. Now, there's a couple of different things that come into play when we talk about tourism. Now, there are licensees can apply for beverage dispensary licenses, beverage dispensary tourism licenses. And as long as they're either at an airport terminal or have a hotel attached to that BDL, they can operate without having to worry about that population limit. So if you were to go around and count the bars in Juneau, you probably have more than 20, as it shows here, beverage dispensary 20. But a lot of those, as I said, are probably BDL tourism licenses. So the Title IV does allow for access to the population cap as long as it meets certain tourism requirements. And the other part, to answer your question, is that I don't think that it really the tourism was taken into account. And I think that's why the stakeholders fought for this new provision in Title IV to say, hey, we have a larger population that comes in. How can we get more licenses? And so as I walk you through these next slides, I think you're going to see that that's how those new qualifying populations will allow a municipality to have more licenses.
Good, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, so I was going to walk you guys through the new statute. It's not very long, but I will skip past the first part which is just simply because it talks about which municipalities qualify for it. Juneau does because it has a law enforcement agency. It does its own planning, and you are in excess of the population cap, so you qualify. So this first part just simply says, in your case, a unified municipality may submit a resolution to the board adopted by its legislative body petitioning the ABC board for the issuance of additional restaurant eating place licenses. Okay, so this is where it goes into what qualifies a municipality to request it. And as I said, I'm going to skip through this because you guys do qualify. You are a center for commercial activity that serves people that do not live there as well. In essence, people come into Juneau for commercial activity. You have a law enforcement department, exercise planning, land use authority, and at the time of the petition, you meet or exceed the limit. So the board may issue these licenses if the number of additional licenses does not exceed the number requested. So that basically means that if you ask for 20 additional REPLs, the board cannot grant you in excess of that. They can give you less and they can give you none, but they can't give you above that. And that they can do it if they find that granting those licenses is in the public interest.
Mr.
Okay,
Gonzalez, 1 moment.
Yes,
Mayor
please.
Wilden.
Could you define what in the public interest means?
Well, I cannot. That onus is on the municipality to do so, to say, hey, granting these licenses is in the public interest. Now, how the other municipalities who've been approved, how they've done it, is they have done so by saying, hey, it's in our economic interest, stimulates job growth, entrepreneurial opportunities. And that's what the board's looking for the municipality to say, hey, this is in our public's interest.
Very good. Please proceed.
Okay. So this next section gets into what the resolution adopted by your legislative body must include. It must include that you meet the criteria that we mentioned before. And it must include the most recent estimate of the number of people who claim residency or work outside of the boundaries of the municipality and who are served by the municipality, including the population located outside of the boundaries that relies on that municipality for goods and services, the visitor population, and the non-resident worker population that resides in the municipality but has not been counted in the latest census. So those three numbers, if you will, is how they're going to take that new population, that new number of people that come in and are not counted as part of your 32,000 to authorize those additional REPLs. So still going with the resolution must include the number of
Mr.
existing.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
1 moment, please. A question from Michelle Hidak.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Gonzalez. I was just wondering, it says and non-resident, A, B, and C. So we have to meet all three of those criteria. So it has to meet the population located outside, visitor population, and non-resident worker population.
You have to provide those numbers to within the resolution to the board. Yes.
Very good. Please proceed.
Okay. So still going with the resolution must include the number of existing REPLs. Again, in your case, that's 22. Both within the boundaries and also outside of the boundaries. Now, in Juneau's case, this may not really be applicable. You don't really have a road system to bring people in from different municipalities into the borough, but they can use other means, of course. So it must include the number of REPLs in the geographic area that the municipality serves. So if, for instance, the municipality says, citizens from this area come in, well, how many REPLs are in that area? And I can provide those numbers for you. I have all of that data at the granular level if and when you need that. Also, the resolution must include information showing that the number of additional licenses requested does not exceed one license for each 1,500 population of the population identified under 2 of this subsection. So those non-resident workers, that visitor population, when we take that big number and we divide it by 1,500, we got to make sure you're not requesting more than that. I imagine your tourism numbers alone would make it very high. Okay, next slide. And this kind of speaks to an earlier question. The resolution must include additional justification as necessary to demonstrate that granting the additional licenses is in the public interest. And that is what the resolution must include, those 5 points. Going on, if the board grants a petition for additional REPLs under this section, the board may not authorize additional REPLs to the same municipality for the following year. So basically, you'd have to take a year off until you could request it again. All right, that concludes me going through the statute and the presentation I have, but I did want to make myself available for any questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Questions from the committee? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. This has been very helpful. So you kept mentioning the resolution. Do we need to do a resolution per each additional eatery that we're proposing, or do we as an assembly decide roughly this is how many we can get, and we do a resolution asking for what the new amount would be, or do we have to do this resolution every year? You lost me a little bit there. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Well, it's the latter situation that you gave. So you're not going to have to ask every time there's an application. You're simply asking to raise that limit from where you're at right now of 22. Let's say you decide to add it by 10. So now that brings it up to 32. And because you guys are 1 in excess, it would actually make it 33. So you would have authority with this one resolution that we could take 10 additional applications and approve them, not worry about the population count, and it would go through the normal process. You would still have the ability as a legislative body to protest it upon renewal or upon application. But yes, you would just be asking for that number.
Mr. Bryson, follow up.
Follow up. So I take it this would go to the manager's office to determine how many, what the calculation would be, or would I would imagine the discussion would stay here. What I'm getting at, Mr. Chair, is how would we determine what that appropriate amount would be? What's the best way to get to that number? And Mr. Gonzalez may be able to help provide that information as well.
Yeah. Do you have any feedback on them, Mr. Gonzalez? As far as I know, the communities, I mean, I guess there is a bit of a math equation or something in there, but I believe it is kind of a resolution by the communities asking for a certain number. But let's see what Mr. Gonzalez has to say.
Yes, sir. So I can give you examples. So in the case of Valdez, and I apologize, I don't have their resolutions in front of me, but I will offer to send them to Di and Beth so they can distribute them if you like to see examples that have been approved. In Valdez's case, they requested and were approved for 10 additional REPLs, and the city of Wasilla just tonight requested and were approved for 20 additional REPLs. And in Wasilla's case, they had, I think their tourism numbers were upwards of 750,000 annual. And that number right there authorized, if you divided that by 1,500 along with their other qualifying populations, they could have requested up to 185 additional REPLs, but of course that's not feasible. So they felt comfortable asking for 20. And when they were having conversations with me just to get some feedback similar to what you guys are doing, they just kind of determined that they didn't, because they had to take a year off before they could request any more, that they wanted to get a good number that would allow for plenty of applicants and not have to be capped again until they can request again.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And I did want to say, just for the committee, I'm trying to capture, along with probably the clerks as well, questions that we have that are maybe broader that maybe we aren't able to, that Mr. Gonzalez may not be able to answer, and that we'll be working on ourselves. So Yeah. Wishal Hidak, please.
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines of what Mr. Bryson was saying, but just a question. So we request say 20, and then we're at 43 from here on out. We don't have to request those 20 like annually or ever again. And then the second question, if I could, Mr. Smith, is, as you're kind of seeing in real time, like Valdez and Wasilla, the level of public interest. I'm just curious as to what they did for public interest. Did they send out a survey? Did they get public testimony? What level of public interest would be viable and help our application be the strongest it can be?
Yes, well, thank you for your question. Well, the first part is that no, you would not have to ask again. If you asked for 20 and were approved for 20, it would take that to 43, and that would be the new number until you request it again under this provision. And as far as receiving public input, that question was actually asked by one of our board members tonight to the city administrator in Wasilla. And, they did a public notice before their city council meeting where they introduced this resolution, opened it up to public testimony. They said they had only one business owner testify in favor of, because he wanted to apply for that REPL. So there wasn't much. I'm not aware of any surveys or anything like that was sent out. I know in Valdez's case, which is a much smaller community, they spoke with a lot of the people who had come to them previously and said, hey, we would like this license. And sorry, we're at our cap. We can't do anything for you. They reached back out to them and brought them into the fold. And they actually had a pretty robust city council meeting where a lot of people were in favor for it. I'm not aware of any opposed. And to take that one step further, once that resolution hits the ABC board's agenda, we also public notice it. We notify the public health people in the state, as well as we notify all the licensees within that municipality where that request is being made.
Very good. Thank you. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions regard to the restaurant eating place license. I understand that it's just beer and wine and you have to have 50% of your profits food. What other restrictions are on those licenses? Do they have hourly restrictions, and can they have live music?
They can have live music. The hourly restriction is the normal one that's laid out in Title IV, which I believe, and forgive me, I would need to reference it. I think it's is it 8 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next day? I imagine you guys have a municipal code in effect restricting that even further, but I'm not sure. I would need to look that up to find out.
Yes, Mr. Gonzalez, we do have code that limits it further than that. Yes, Mayor Weldon.
Okay, and then I have a follow-up on the seasonal restaurant eating place license. Since we have no control over that locally, do you notify us that these places got these licenses, or do we just see a change in their business habits?
You mean if someone applies for a seasonal REPL?
Yes.
Yeah, a seasonal REPL would get noticed to your clerk's office with the normal 60-day protest period in place for the muni to review. So yes, you would be notified on any applicants for that license.
Very good. I'm going to hop in just really quickly. Mayor Weldon brought up the seasonal REPLs. Businesses petition to the board directly for those, and my understanding that is a new feature with this Title IV rewrite. Is that correct, Mr. Gonzalez?
Seasonal REPLs still need to apply through the normal process, and it does go through your local governing body with the 60-day protest period to review. I'm not aware of anything beyond that, but please allow me to look into that to make sure I give you the right answer. Seasonal REPL is a new one, and I need to dig in to make sure that there's not something I'm missing here.
Okay, thank you. On that as well, I guess previous to this, and it might be those public conveyance REPLs, there was there was a process where a business could, I believe they had to go and get signatures or something out in the community in a certain area around where their business would be. So that was an existing process that businesses could go petition for additional REPLs. My understanding is that that pathway is no longer allowed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Those public convenience licenses were converted to true REPLs. And in
Okay.
Juneau, you had one.
Very good. And so now the pathway for getting more REPLs is through a local governing body via this resolution.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Mr. Bryson, I'm sorry, did you have one?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. Can I ask a question about marijuana in these new regulations? I know that you're pressed for time. If the answer is no, I'll follow up offline.
Would you maybe mind if we try to do that another time, just because I do want to try to give Mr. Palmer a little time. Mayor Wells. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. So I'm just a little confused on these seasonal restaurant eating place license. Are they in addition to our 22, or can we Juneau not have any unless we ask for more licenses?
So a seasonal restaurant eating place licenses do count against the population cap. Seasonal restaurant and eating place tourism licenses do not.
Did you want to ask what those were?
And so what would that be?
The tourism licenses? Okay. Yeah, so the seasonal restaurant eating place tourism license it authorizes them also brewed beer and wine, but it does not count against the population cap. It goes against tourism numbers separate to this resolution. And this is also a new provision that I answered previously. I'd have to dig in to see exactly what qualifies them, but it is separate to, it's not a population cap license.
Very good. Thank you for that. Any other questions for Mr. Gonzalez? And if not, I did want to give us a little time to discuss as a committee, do we have broader other questions about this process and other things we might want to hear back from the clerks or anyone before we decide whether to not proceed with any? Yes. Mr. Bryson, please.
Mr. Chair, I think the question that I might ask out loud is, how many times have we had to deny an applicant? How many people have applied? How many businesses would this create an opportunity for? If the number is small, do we start with like 8 and see how long it takes to get 8 new eateries in town? Or I'm just throwing that number out there. But I'd want statistical information to say this might be a good starting place to determine this. So some stats on like what numbers we could be looking at would be helpful.
Mr. Gonzalez, does your agency, would you be able to say over the last 3 years how many businesses that have, I guess they probably wouldn't go through an application. Are you able to see how many have not been able to apply or that you've turned down, or is that not something you track?
Well, we could, if they actually went through the application process, we could, but usually they get told no before they even get to submitting an application. It usually starts with a phone call. Hey, I want to do this. Sorry, that's capped. And we do not keep that data.
Okay, understood. Rajali Doc.
Yeah, for me, it would be from our team is kind of a consideration of what public interest looks like from our side. Are we just going to public notice and then just hope people show up? We're going to do additional outreach, just a recommendation on what that could look like.
Very good. Any other questions or thoughts about it? Okay. My understanding is this will be back before us in December. In the December meeting, I believe we'll have an agenda item for it. And of course, other consideration in my mind too, public health. Like, I'm curious, does having places where you can buy just beer and wine, does that show negative impacts on public health? I think about restaurants I go to and I don't see people overly consuming at, places they get beer and wine. But obviously it's a complicated issue and a powerful, substance with a lot of importance, and that's why it's strongly regulated. So, Mr. Bryson.
Mr. Smith, I appreciate that sentiment. One thing that I was thinking about is that once this came out, it would take a little bit of time for people to be like, oh, there's additional licenses. And so I think it would take the business community or entrepreneurs a little bit of time to say, hey, wow, there's extra licenses. You've got a year of development, thinking around financing. And so having some statistical information so that way we had like an opening round of an opportunity for people to say, hey, maybe I can open a restaurant now because I can carry beer and wine, which is something that would prevent a restaurant from opening because a real restaurant that doesn't have even beer and wine doesn't stand a chance. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Mr. Gonzalez, thank you very much for being here tonight. We appreciate the good information you provided and the questions. And yeah, thank you for your work.
And thank you. I'm available for any further questions through email.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Moving on to our next items. Mr. Palmer, agenda item 4, the ordinance regarding a Juneau Whistleblower Act. Please.
Thank you. Doing a little double duty with tech. Put that duty aside and we'll go here. So the whistleblower ordinance in front of you is a draft. It was the genesis behind it comes from practical experience over the last 10 years and looking at our conflict of interest code. So we have a conflict of interest code, a very robust conflict of interest code, but it doesn't explicitly say whistleblower. And so we've had events over the last 10 years in which employees have asked the question when there's a conflict of interest that's bubbling around, do we have whistleblower protections or not? And the short answer is yes, we do, but it's because of state law. So there's an overarching state law that governs this topic, but it allows municipalities, the state law allows municipalities to adopt their own whistleblower act. And if you do that, then that act governs, not the state law. And so the opportunity before this committee is to answer the question, is this something we want to consider further or not? And if so, the draft in front of you is just a draft to get that conversation started. And it's premised on the state law. It's nearly identical. There's a couple small distinctions, but there's relatively 4 common concepts. So the first item is to promote government accountability. The second item is to provide processes for employees to raise concerns. The third is to protect employees that raise concerns, and then 4 is to provide enforcement mechanisms. And I'll just emphasize this is for employees, not for the general public. So the conflict of interest code does have some provisions that apply to the general public if they want to raise concerns regarding specific municipal officers, but the whistleblower ordinance in state law and as proposed would only really protect and provide protections for employees. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions or go through this further.
Questions from the committee? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Attorney, what if Juneau was to take on its own whistleblower protections, what would you add to the state law to make it appropriate for a Juneau situation? Or is the state law adequate for what our needs would be here in the community? What changes will we make?
Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, thank you. So the state law is actually really comprehensive. There's a few things that have been proposed in this draft that are different from state law, and so I can cover those real quick. The second page, so this is under 0146010. This is second page of the ordinance. This is protection for whistleblowers. Everything in here is nearly identical to state law. I mean, there's a couple tweaks between supervisor and manager, but substantively it's identical except for the last item. State law requires posting of whistleblower protections in various workplaces. That's not proposed in this draft. If you want to include posting of protections, we can definitely include that. Otherwise, the philosophy was this would be a ordinance in the books and it would be covered during new employee orientation, and then any subsequent employee if this was adopted, be covered in subsequent employee meetings. So that's one change. The second substantive change is on the next section. So on page 3 of the ordinance, there's a down line, let's say 1920-ish. So before an employee can make a whistleblower claim outside of the CBJ, so outside would be to different entities, the employee would have to notify the manager or know that the manager knows about the topic. And so state law actually provides that they reasonably believe the employee, state law says the employee reasonably believes the report to the manager will not resort in prompt action to remedy the public concern. So I think it's captured in there, but it is a little different. And then the last item is on page 4 of 5. State law, well, let me back up. So if somebody were to violate if an employer were to violate the Whistleblower Act, under state law, this state law allows the person who's been violated the opportunity to get punitive damages, so punishment damages. That's a little interesting. So I back up. In general state law, municipalities are not subject to punitive damages because the idea of punitive damages for government is that the taxpayers are the one who pays. And so the philosophy is if a government harms a citizen or a person, the government needs to generally pay the economic, what they actually suffered, and usually some pain and suffering if there's that component to the claim, but not punitive damages because that's over and above and harms the public treasury because taxes or user fees pay for that. However, state law does allow for punitive damages in whistleblower claims. The draft in front of you does not have that. So if you want to allow for punitive damages, I would have to draft that back in. So those are the 3 substantive changes to this, and I'd be happy to answer more questions.
Vincent?
Thank you. I noticed on page 3, line 13, you talk about a person is not entitled to protections unless they report the information in good faith. I didn't see a definition for good faith exactly in this ordinance. I was wondering if that's just a generally known legal term or if that needs to be defined in the ordinance.
Yeah, good question. That is not defined in this ordinance, and the definitions come directly from state law. There are good faith requirements in employment law that we could use by analogy. So that's what I would suggest on this, but if there's something specific you want to add, we can definitely explore that.
Mr. Bryson?
I have a motion when you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before that, if you don't mind, just one
Sure.
quick question from my side. Mr. Palmer, if we were to implement a Whistleblower Act in city code versus state law, would it change the burden on, anyway, would the city have to take on more responsibility to defend these claims or anything? Does it change that? I mean, would you expect adding new staff or would there be more work as a result of it changing from, to an act in code?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe so. The state law allows the Attorney General to investigate and prosecute. The Attorney General obviously could, if there's a state law issue that appears to be systematic, that's applying where whistleblowers are being violated in the CBJ, that would still apply. So the Attorney General's office would still have the authority, but I don't see anything like that happening on the local level.
Okay. And then just the last one is, so if these people, and I guess the other one would be like this personal liability on page 4. I mean, again, I'm just trying to think of if this shifts, like, does it move? Anyway, that doesn't shift the burden. I mean, these people are still personally liable. Like the city wouldn't pay these claims either before or after. I mean, but with the State Whistleblower Act or a city act.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that language in B and C is the same as in state law. I think it's a little bit of an open question depending on how egregious the act is. So in general, a CBJ employee has indemnification for their acts when they're acting in the scope of their employment and everything is within reason. If somebody does something super gross and let's say it's a criminal violation in addition to a whistleblower violation, that might be a different story where the individual could be personally liable. But again, that's the same as in state law.
Very good. Any further questions? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move ordinance serial draft 2023-4 VHRC, an ordinance establishing City and Borough of Juneau Whistleblower Act, asked it to be moved to the full assembly, and I ask for unanimous consent
Very good, Mr. Bryson. And for introduction.
for introduction. Yes, sir.
Very good. Seeing no objection, that motion passes. Thank you. Mr. Palmer, if you have, let's give this a shot. I may need to cut you off just to give the clerks time to change over and for us to maybe discuss those meetings, but let's give this a shot about midterm vacancies, the fifth item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll cruise through this. The whereas clauses in the ordinance on page 1 and a little bit on page 2 provide the context, the story as to why this is coming before you. But the short context for you is there's some ambiguity in charter, city code, and state law as to when a midterm sitting assembly member resigns, what happens next. So the assembly can always appoint a new member, but the question is when that person resigns, does the vacancy appear on the upcoming ballot or not? And that's dependent on how close in context that resignation occurs to the election. So the draft in front of you would provide clarity, subject to a little bit of nuance that the municipal election official, the clerk, can reduce it a little bit. But the general rule is that if the midterm person resigns more than 60 days from the upcoming election, that vacancy would appear on the ballot in addition to the other 3 vacancies that would also be there. But if the person resigns within 60 days, then the assembly would appoint somebody for roughly 14 months to fill that vacancy, because there's functionally no way to put that position on the ballot to let the voters know that it's actually vacant. So that's what this ordinance would clarify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or invite the clerks up if there's more details.
Any questions from the committee? Any motions from the committee? Washal Hidak, please.
Yeah, I move ordinance number 2023-32 VHRC to the full, or for introduction to the full assembly, and ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objection, that motion passes. Mr. Palmer, thank you very much. Let's see, moving on to next items. Staff reports, item 6, setting Empower board interview dates. Ms. Cathcart.
Thanks, Chair Smith. I think you can see, pretty much my summary is what I'm asking for is now would be the time for us to think about, at least set some placeholders for December dates. It would be the Planning Commission as well as Hospital Board. So trying to get some dates set would be great.
Very good, thank you. I saw the number of seats open. My typical preference is to try to do that in one night. And I think we've been going for an all Zoom type scenario recently. I think it's nicer for applicants. It's fairer across the board. If someone's out of town or traveling, it's just kind of all the same. I guess trying to think now some possible dates. I mean,
Chair Smith.
yes.
If it helps, I don't think I wrote it on here, but probably the week of December 11th, I think, would keep you from running into too many holidays and other things, even though you will have a HRC and assembly meeting that night. But that's the only meeting I think that week.
Very good. Preferences by the committee on, say, the 12th, 13th, 14th. I prefer the 12th or the 13th. That's a Tuesday or Wednesday, probably versus the 14th. But
Chair, I
yes.
think the Planning Commission meets on the 12th.
Okay.
So 13th, 14th.
Okay. Maybe we can, and I'll bring it up under chair reports tonight. Run it by the full assembly, but let's target the 12th and 13th of December for. Excuse me. I meant, yeah, 13th and 14th. Thank you. For board interviews. Okay, very good. On that, I guess my request to the committee. Another request in there was about the questions and if we wanted to do any changes or anything. I would say, we could bring the changes back to the next HRC, but that timing would not work out. They would need them. These go out in advance. Maybe this will just be a perpetual topic we have. Or we could try to address them or bring changes at the next meeting, knowing they would go to the following hospital board and planning commission meeting. Mr. Bryce.
Mr. Chair, just going off of my experience interviewing these folks before, an excellent time to discuss changes to the interview questions would be the HRC meeting following the interview, so that all the information is fresh in our head. It'd be a good time if we need to tweak, because right now I couldn't remember what the questions were, and we got a new HRC board, but that'd be an excellent opportunity to get a couple of, I said I wouldn't remember them, I know I could read them out. It would be helpful to do a round of interviews and then see what corrections need to get made. Thank you,
Mr. Bryson. Michelle Hidock.
Yeah, and I know I've said this before. I'll just repeat that with some folks, it's not easy to talk about yourself, and so the more scenario questions we can offer, where they can talk about something they've encountered as an employee or as a staff member or as a leader, helps to differentiate and give some versatility to our questions to maybe make them a little more open and welcoming for some more equity on our boards.
That's great. I'm trying, knowing that we're coming up on time to give time to transition over. Part of me is wondering, maybe we can, as we choose that date, maybe we can give ourselves 15 or 20 minutes before the interview start or something, and that way we can discuss some possible questions. And then could you add maybe like interview questions to that December agenda, and maybe we can talk about it here a little bit first, and then we can kind of carry over some thoughts to the interviews on the 13th or 14th. Is that, I can run that by you again.
Yeah, Chair Smith, if I might, I know that we're running out of time. If there isn't anything burning on these, because we actually send these out ahead of time so that people see, but maybe at the January meeting, you could have where you're looking at all of them, because we'll do this process again in June for everything. So maybe looking at all the questions at once with your new board and coming up with, like, as Wahalgaduck said, some different questions might
that
be
sounds
the
good.
best bet.
Thank you for that clarification. I was kind of thinking if we wanted to discuss it December, like, is there a better way for us to ask those in-person questions? Like, do we have a slate of standard questions so that we're interviewing everyone with the same one? That's what I was kind of thinking more for the December. But it totally heard Ms. Cathcart, and let's put up definitely a placeholder for the January meeting to review the written questions, and maybe just a short agenda topic on the December meeting to review the in-person ones. Does that sound okay? Okay, and I can run that by you because I'm babbling probably. Okay, that moves us through staff reports. Any committee member comments and questions? Seeing none, our next meeting date is December 11th of this year at 6 p.m. You can see some of the possible items for discussion there. Thanks to the committee and to staff. We are adjourned.